Please welcome ABC News correspondent Bob Woodruff and Oprah Magazine's Lucy Kaylin.
Off.
Yeah, exactly, make sure of that. Good morning, everybody. It's so great to be here. I am honored to be here with Bob Woodruff. At a time when news increasingly is, being written and being sent from the privacy and safety of someone's cubicle, where the scariest thing that might happen is you forget your password. Bob put his life on the line to get the story and came very, very close to losing it. We will go all the way back for now and revisit that.
Since birthday?
Yeah, exactly. So Bob started out his career as a lawyer. You'd gone to Michigan Law, and you were doing, mergers and acquisitions work, that kind of thing. And you were liking it, but you weren't completely in love with it, correct? I mean, it was a decent job to have.
I think like everything else, I loved it in the beginning, and then it kind of got a little older,
right.
All of that. But I just ultimately when I left, it's because I just discovered something that I never really thought that I would do.
Well, let's get into that. You got the opportunity to teach law in Beijing because you're pretty close to fluent in Mandarin, I guess.
Far from it. but I was in love with China, and ever since really I was at law school. Michigan was really a huge China studies university.
Right.
And I was completely just enticed by it. I mean, I thought China was going to be the future in the world. In fact, in the world of magazines, I mean, literally in the front page of Newsweek and Time magazine was, there's Deng Xiaoping, this guy who's now bringing this country out of the Cultural Revolution and turning a little bit more towards capitalism and freedom, and someday we were hoped some kind of democracy. But anyway, we saw that the country was changing.
Right.
And I thought, this is the place to go. So I started studying Chinese.
Right.
And then ultimately ended up taking my second year at Sherman Sterling, the law firm.
Right.
Had a chance to go teach law through some of my friends Chinese friends at Michigan, a chance to go teach law. And this is the largest law university in China to teach these young Chinese students
right.
what law is.
And so incredible happenstance occurs, which is the uprising in Tiananmen Square. And there you are in the thick of it. And you, it seems to me, by the way, having read Bob's extraordinary book, In an Instant, co-authored with his wife, I recommend it to everyone.
She actually read it. That's
I really did. It's
so rare.
It's compulsively readable. It's a nail biter. It's an incredible story. But it seems to me that that's when you got bitten by the journalism bug.
I did, and actually, so my wife wouldn't actually move there with me unless I married her. So we did 2 days before we moved over there, and it was just a remarkable trip. My wife was pretty shocked that this is where we were living. The dorm, we were the first foreigners to live in this dorm really since the Cultural Revolution ever, and just had a hole in the floor, and there was nowhere to take showers except in the middle of the campus. Anyway, she was ready to kind of head back to
She
to the
sounded
US
like she really liked
here.
that a lot. Yeah.
But then during the year, in the spring of 1989, after we'd been there almost a year, the students took to the square, Tiananmen Square, and then it led to this massacre on June 4th, 1989. And I didn't really know. I lived completely in the China world there at the university, so I didn't really know many foreigners, many Americans. But there was one guy, John Liu, who was a cameraman for CBS, television, CBS News. And there was times he would give us his apartment, his nice apartment to live in while they went on vacation, so my wife and I could have showers and kind of live in a more westernized world. And so we became friends. And then when the Tiananmen Square started to happen, my students stopped going to class. Mm-hmm. They were the protesters in the square. And so he called me up and he says, "Listen, can you just be a fixer? Can you take some of these CBS reporters around the city, do simple interviews on the streets, what the city is." Right. And I did, so I ended up working with Bob Simon.
Yeah.
And so I kind of started at the very top, and I had no idea
Exactly.
that this was actually the best person and the best story ever.
Exactly, and also Susan Zirinsky, who of course was a young field producer at
Yep,
the time,
Z.
and of course Z, and she would of course be named quite recently the president of CBS News.
I blame her for
Yeah,
getting me
indeed,
into this world.
indeed, and that's a great story in the book as well, where I think you have to kind of double back and say, no, give me a chance, because she's looking for a fixer, a translator, and she's like, well, I need really impeccable here, language-wise, and you sort of that's your moment. I need to get that gig.
Yeah, I said no. I said I don't think I could qualify fully. I mean, I have to sit there and do, Deng Xiaoping interviews and things. Oh no, just get us around the town and do simple stuff on the street. So I went down the elevator. I can't do it, Z. Got to the bottom, turned the button again. I went back up, and I said, all right, I'm going to do this. And so it ended up 100 just completely changed our lives.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And so fully, sort of focused on this incredible work. There was just a quote that I loved so much in terms of, Bob's realizing that, reporting and news gathering was going to be his life. He describes it as it's the chance to be in the moment while history was being made. So there was no way you were not going to be doing that now. So what that meant was leaving your law career and starting as a neophyte and trying to get work as a reporter. And it also meant going from a salary of $130,000 to $12,000. And your nice wife went along with that.
I know, I'm an idiot. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah, she put up with all these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was to convince her to do it. Really didn't take that much time. Fortunately, we were very young. I came back to practice law after Tiananmen Square, after experiencing all of this. I came back and I practiced for 2 more years at the same firm, this time in the San Francisco office. And literally, we arrived in San Francisco about a month before the whole place started to fall under the earthquake in 1989.
Right.
So again, all I wanted to do was cover that. Mm-hmm. But it took a long time to give it up and take the cut. So it ultimately got into journalism, and I guess I didn't realize at the time, one, I can't predict what the great story is going to be next, so I can go there and find it. Right. But I did know that I wanted to do it, and I just kind of moved my way up. And then everything started to change again when the wars really started again after the Cold War ended.
Of course. And it's a very interesting story to read of Bob making his way through, figuring out how to do this job and the stand-ups and everything, which are really, some of which are very, very amusing. But you nailed it.
I sucked,
At a certain point you nailed it, and, obviously rose to the absolute pinnacle of your profession, being named co-anchor of ABC's World News Tonight. So not so long after that happens, of course, the situation in Iraq is erupting, and the invasion is, I think, about to happen. And you embed with the 4th Infantry Division in Iraq, and you're in an armored vehicle that gets hit by an IED, and you suffer really a catastrophic injury, a traumatic brain injury, along with a lot of other injuries. And you were in a medically induced coma for, I think, 36 days. So it's, if I ask you what you remember about that time, maybe not much, but what can you tell us about the before and after of that incredible experience?
Well, that was the 8th time I'd been to Iraq at that time. Actually walking down here for the first time in several years to the memorial 9/11 is that on that day on 9/11, we were in our bureau. We were based over in London. So I was in the bureau when suddenly we saw this one plane hit. And we all looked at each other. We said, this is Osama bin Laden, because we've been covering that forever. And then the next one hit. And we said, oh my God. Next thing I know, we just disappeared into Pakistan and then into Afghanistan for the next 17 straight weeks. I never went back and saw my kids, and came back and we said, I got to take the kids on a vacation or something. So we went to Ireland just to drink the Guinness and go hang out with the sheep. Right. I didn't want any more stress. We're almost like suffering from our own PTSD, having been over there so much time for so long. But then I guess what we never really expected was going to happen is then yet another war then in Iraq. So I was there twice when Hussein was still in power. And then after the invasion, we went on the invasion in 2003 with the first LAR of the Marines, the first time I ever embedded as a journalist. And we went in there, and it was a very fast invasion, and then, of course, everything changed in the next few years. So I went back again, I think the fourth time after that, back to in 2006, right when the State of the Union, which is going to happen right about now, President Bush was going to deliver the State of the Union. And my co-anchor, World News, Elizabeth Vargas, was going to report out of D.C., and given the fact that the entire topic was going to be about the Iraqi military getting the power passed over to them from the U.S. military. And we wanted to go see and what are we really accomplishing in the villages, what's going on, what do they think? And so I went over to Taji with the 4th Infantry, this time with the Army. And we were literally driving down this road in 8 vehicles. And we were in like a Russian tank in the front with the Iraqis. We didn't realize that we were going to be the first in line. Me and my cameraman and my sound man and my producer.
And you were up the hatch.
Yeah, so my cameraman and I dug boat, and I stood up to do like a stand-up.
Right.
And it was the Iraqi driver was up right next to us, and he's shooting on the camera, and I never remember this at all because it was about 3 seconds later. He told us to get down because he thought this might be getting a more dangerous IED location. And so, but it was 3 seconds later when this huge IED explosion blew about 20 feet off to the left. My cameraman, Doug Vogt, was right here. The explosion kind of was protected from hitting him as badly as it was with me, but with this blast, he was actually rolling on tape, and we also put a camera implanted on the front of the tank. And those videos, you don't see anything other than the camera dying because in that IED explosion, it's the air blast that hits first, knocked out the cameras, knocked me completely over. Doug was leveled on the top of the tank. I knocked out instantly. Then that was followed by the rocks and the metal and the sand from the ground.
Because they pack rocks into the device for maximum damage, and one of them got lodged in your head.
Yeah, so yes, it's shattered partly the left part of my skull. It shattered my jaw all over here, shattered my scapula on the back. There were rocks, and I'm also blinded in 1/4 of both of my eyes in the upper right. So, I can't see this until about there. That's also because it was actually one of the nerves was damaged as well. Some of these rocks went right in front of my left eye and planted right here in the nose. I would be blinded for sure if that one didn't happen. Actually, sometimes I think that it was 1 centimeter. I was leaning this way or that way. I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
I mean, it's extraordinary that you're sitting here right now and in the shape that you're in, which seems pretty.
Yeah, because those guys, it was
perfect.
pretty amazing. Although, so we don't know where those insurgents went. The guys that triggered it, we think with a cell phone. Yeah. But all the U.S. and the Iraqi soldiers got out of their vehicles to come get us. And at that time, on all four corners, the insurgents opened fire against them. They fired back. We don't know if they killed them or they ran or whatever it may be. But they got in and they pulled us out, stopped I was bleeding to death. My neck over here was completely cut into, and it was pumping blood, and they held that and saved me. Then a helicopter was coming in, and the commander in Baghdad ordered them, says, listen, there's still insurgents in the area, don't land right now. And they turned down the radio and they landed anyway.
It's incredible.
And they got us onto this vehicle, flew us off to Baghdad to say, really, they realized I was dead for sure. And then I came back to life, and then up to 2 more places through Germany and then back. And that was 36 days before I woke up.
It's the most extraordinary story. And, given that we're here in a journalism conference and the importance of it, anyone who's not you might want to ask the question, given the price that you paid and what you went through, which was harrowing to say the least, you are still a deep proponent of this kind of journalism, immersive, sometimes expensive, messy, difficult. given what you've been through, tell us why this remains the most important work we can do.
You know, I think we have so much reporting. I think people are getting pieces of information. I think everybody in this room knows exactly all of this, but I think especially my kids, I think they're getting pieces of information from out there and they can't really identify who gave it to them. Right. You know, in the old days, it was so simple when we had this major monopoly in television news, and you did in magazine world. There's only X number of places where you could get the information. And because of this, we had a pretty damn good profit, right? We were making enough money so that it wasn't for glory, but it was for, we had people we could hire to make sure it's fact, right? We would never report anything with these, you know, double sources, right? We would never report it without it. And because there was really no cell phones or so many affiliates that we would have relationships with around the world, we probably wouldn't even be able to get any information or perspective on something unless somebody was there in person.
Right.
I mean, this war, I just thought about this when you asked that, is that, you know, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was completely different than the coverage of 1991 in that invasion of Iraq, where no reporters were allowed to embed or even get near the U.S. forces. So that was the hugest regret that the government had back then under Bush 1, is that they had a pretty good victory in that, you know, and nobody was there to cover it. Right. I guess it's kind of backwards in the sense that then the next two wars was not exactly the happiest endings to them too, but we were able now to go there and report about the wars. And I think those are the ones that were absolutely crucial, that we had the ability to go and report from it.
Yeah.
This is now all over the world. How can we have access to see this information?
Right.
One right now, you know, about 5 years ago, we went to, you know, Xinjiang in China, where now it's this whole Uyghur controversy has happened, where you know, the Muslims of northwestern China are now being you know, educated, you know, really in camps. But now it's almost impossible for us to go in there. All you're really seeing is the perspective from China, where they have allowed some journalists in there and they just manipulate what the reporting is.
Right, exactly.
If we had the ability and more people that have the ability to get in, then we'd have a lot more, the truth a lot faster.
Well, it's a sort of at least a two-pronged thing. One is certainly what you're talking about. It's you know, shrinking budgets and shrinking bureaus and all of that. And you know, it's extraordinary that, and I'll get to my second point after I ask you about this, but you have, of course, reported from North Korea, which must be, you know, an incredible task and an important thing to do, because otherwise that news is just not getting out. Of course, you're persona non grata there now, but
who did you talk to? How do you know?
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's true. After the last story we did 2 different hours for 2020 about one is, you know, an American who was killed over there in Iraq, and then a second story we did about the killing of Kim Jong-un's half-brother, Kim Jong-nam, who died in the Kuala Lumpur airport where he was poisoned to death. And we did that story, and there's moments in that reporting within that it was so you know, against their great leader that they were so offended by it, and probably more likely scared that they were going to get punished or maybe executed unless they did something about this report. So we've been told that I can't go. That was the 8th time in North Korea for that, and I'm not allowed to be.
I think that's good. I think
know,
it's
so
better
all the
that
countries,
way.
yeah, that's kind of honorable,
I think it's
right?
better that way.
To be banned from North Korea. But yeah, I've covered all of Asia.
It's extraordinary. But then there's the other prong that I wanted to talk about, is sort of our piece of it as news consumers. And you know, it's something that concerns me greatly, that obviously we have the opportunity now to almost like, you know, custom make our you know, our news. We just go to very partisan feeds, and we have our, you know, the opportunity to have our viewpoints reinforced again and again and again, whether it's certain TV stations or what you consume online. And of course, there's the algorithm there that's feeding us what we want to hear and see. I mean, this is scary stuff. And the antidote, I guess, would have to be just independent, intrepid journalists who are willing to go and get that story.
And longer form. You know, I think about in the world of magazine, and right now I'm really not doing much breaking news anymore. I'm not doing hardly any. I haven't done Good Morning America stories in a long time. I don't do that much world news tonight unless we can link it together with a longer form piece that we're doing.
Right.
Where Nightline, we can get up to about 19 minutes for coverage of a story, or 20 out of an hour with commercials. You can get about 42 minutes on 2020. And now we've got this completely open world of places we can put our content that didn't exist before, like you had, like Nat Geo before, which is now Disney is now buying into. But we've got all sorts of places to put it.
Yeah.
I did a year and a half doing a story about the environment on Discovery. We've done stuff on Nat Geo. Actually, another coverage of the Olympics in South Korea for Nat Geo. So now we've got this chance to do longer form. Because with my kids, it's always been my dream that they would read something more than a paragraph.
Yeah, I know.
Especially these stories that it's so complicated.
I know. Context is everything, as we know.
Yeah, it's like, Dad, what's going on in China? Because that's like a big country, right?
It's a big
like,
country.
Yeah, let's go more details now. Yeah,
Right.
What's going on in China? What's going on in Myanmar?
Yeah.
But that's kind of an interesting one too. This is the one that really bothers the hell out of me. So I've been doing a lot of reporting about the Rohingya people.
Yeah, for sure.
The ones that have been also Muslims in Myanmar that are also being abused, and now had about more than a million of them now fled into Bangladesh. Right. And so we were down in the capital of Myanmar and asked people their opinions about the Rohingya people. Yeah. Do you believe they are real citizens of this country? Do you think their thoughts about it? Every single one of them think they're a big fraud. They were never part of Myanmar. They should not be citizens in this country. And I said, where do you get that information from? Right. I said, from Facebook. And then Facebook did not even have, and I've got so many friends at Facebook, and they didn't have anybody that even was able to read what was being written on Facebook, because there was nobody that was able to speak the language or read the language.
So scary.
So that's when, we needed somebody with legitimacy to be doing the bulk of the reporting out of there.
Right.
And that was the people within the country. Now, us in this country, we all know a completely different story, because I don't think that Facebook is going to have an impact over here and these kind of disillusions and these lies, but the people within the country, that's all they have.
Exactly right.
These countries that are really dictatorship countries, now they have the power that they never had before.
That's right.
To tell the lies.
And of course, even though it would seem to be a somewhat better situation here, we do know that there is, organized efforts to kind of demonize journalists happening now, and that makes it all the trickier to put out what we know to be the truth when it's being undercut.
Did you see Tom Hanks' thing from the Washington Post on the Super Bowl?
No, tell.
Oh God, this little minute commercial that Washington Post bought with Tom Hanks voicing this piece. Anybody see this thing? It's fantastic. He's just talking about the sacrifice that journalists do, about reporting does it for the country.
I think I was making nachos at the time.
Yeah, how much does that cost? I mean, how much did they spend for that? I thought
That's amazing.
everybody I know, I put it right out there on my lying Facebook. I'm just kidding.
That's amazing.
I put it out on all our stuff to get out there, because I think it was a great message.
That's amazing.
And hopefully we've kind of, right now, given so many reasons, politically and others, that maybe we're doing a turn where we can at least fight for the sacrifices that people take.
I hope you're right.
I think there's more in prison now, journalists now in prison than ever before. Saudi Arabia, they've been executed. A lot of dictatorship countries now have this confidence now that they will not be looked at if they do it.
Yeah.
And that never happened before.
Yeah, no, it's horrifying. Before I open it up to just a couple of questions, I want to talk about the Woodruff Foundation. Can you tell us about that?
The good thing about having been blown up was, well, at least we've been able to start a foundation to help the other veterans that have been, those that have been badly wounded and have been, they served the country. Because actually when I was in the Bethesda Naval, when I was still unconscious, my brother, who by the way worked for Hearst and Bloomberg forever, still is with Bloomberg in Detroit. But anyway, so my brother and my family were all there, and they were seeing some of the veterans that were even there in Bethesda Naval did not have the kind of support and the help that we were getting. I mean, ABC was amazing. Our friends were incredible. These are the ones that didn't have the kind of job. They were not 44 years old, which I was all those years ago. They were like 21 years old. They didn't have much of the ability to do much. So they said, you know what, we're not going to ever let this happen. We can do something little, at least, just to do something for some of them that we know, just to get them a mattress when they got to leave the base as family, and, or just somehow get something to deal with their health care and to get access to get to the hospital with a better car or something. And then it just started to expand.
Yeah, $45 million later.
Yes, yes. We've funded at least actually more than 50 million now, and we have a huge fundraiser you guys should all come to in New York every November, where Springsteen's come back for the last 12 years,
awesome.
and some of the great comedians
Jerry
in the world.
Seinfeld, yeah.
So it's been good. I feel pretty good about
And
that.
it's actual, money and resources, but it's also consciousness raising, which is so important about what these guys are going through, guys and women, obviously.
It's true. Yeah, that's the other thing too. Embedding, with the military. I think there was in the beginning of the world of embedding, where there was absolute, I wouldn't call it dislike, but distrust probably that the military felt about us.
Right.
And I think that completely changed, because that's when I make that argument as well, is that covering the wars. When we're embedded, we only had a couple of rules. The rules that we had to adhere to was we could not report on the exact location of where we were, like in the invasion of Iraq, for example. And if somebody was killed, we will not report their names and their identity until the families are informed of it. That was it. Everything else was the traditional old journalism. We would dig the information, they'd try to keep it away from us, and then we'd report. And we had, no war has ever been covered so much in depth as that invasion.
That was incredible. It's all very vivid to me, and of course what happened to you, very vivid to me, all these incredible journalists all embedded. It was riveting television, I can tell you that. We may have time for 2 questions. Who's got a question for Bob? Come on, journalists. Come on, publishers. Yeah? Anybody? Yes.
For this conflagration of the sort of erosion of paying for journalism, the way sort of things have changed, the way the economy has changed. As you've pointed out, you were embedded someplace, foreign correspondence, good journalism, good writing, it costs money. And it seems like that's what there's less of, and it seems to be the sort of downward spiral. I mean, what do you think? What do you think the possible paths to the future are?
I think whenever I wish I had an answer to all of this did, but I think when something disastrous happens, I think it lasts for a while, and I think people start to realize this needs to get fixed, and we're seeing a little bit of that right now. My brother, who does work at Bloomberg, told me the other day. He says when people kind of get into the information that he's got out there, they created a paywall. Yeah. So with the paywall, and somehow tripled the number of people that wanted to get this information out because they had to pay for it. And I think the New York Times sales and
The profits,
profit went way up when all these lies that were floating everywhere became very clear. So I think some organizations have actually getting better because people are finally realized that if they really want something legit, they have to pay for it. I think that's starting to happen. Yeah. People say, I said, well, when you see in-depth stories now, what do you think about them? I personally think the long-form stuff that's now created is better than it was before, but the problem is finding where it is. Because now we've got a million places to put it. Disney, who's just buying all sorts of things that we can put content on now, they're getting into, Fox and Nat Geo, they're going to have a lot of it, and Hulu. We can put things out there that we didn't really have access to. In the old days, we could put, a lot of short pieces on. And the trick is not so much to be able to get long form on, it's just the topic of what the story is going to be. And I think people do want real serious news now. I know that my kids, for example, they are much more interested now in interesting long form story, and they're more willing to listen to something more than a minute anymore. They want to hear something more because they just really feel like they've been deprived of this information. So I think there's hope. I don't think we're all trying to figure out how to make the money to do this. We now, every time we do a story, it goes everywhere now. It's no longer just on World News Tonight. It's not just on 2020. Now it's all over the media and digital world.
That's right.
So if we can figure out how to when people ultimately want to pay for it, which I think they're now doing that,
Exactly right.
then maybe there's hope.
Time for one more. Yes.
What's the conversation like with children when you think about why Daddy does this, why Daddy puts himself in danger, and have there been moments, obviously, where you thought it's not worth risking my life?
I just tell them, listen, next time I'll duck. My kids, you know, I have this weird,
He's got 4 of them, by the way.
so my son was like, oh, that was cool, Dad. You got blown up. Oh, okay. And then my little daughter's like, Dad, why did you do that? You know, all the kids have different thoughts of it. And then the little twin girls, they were only 5 years old. They can't even remember half of it.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is too, I really, both to ABC and to my family, I said, I'm not going to cover any more wars like this. I said, I could cover conflict, though. So that's why I've been for the last 3 years in reporting out of China and all over Asia, because they don't really have wars yet. They just have tons of possibly dangerous conflicts. So I'm not doing the same thing that I did before. I had to give it up, and Doug Vogt, my cameraman, he gave it up after 25 years of covering wars.
But it seems to me, you know, apart from your wife and your 4 kids, this has been your true love, and it's hard to turn your back on your true love.
Yeah, I've been a wanderluster,
Yeah.
you know, forever.
For sure.
That's why I got out of law. Law was like so deep and knew so much about this narrow topic. You go into journalism where everything's like wide and shallow. It's like perfect, you know.
Right. I thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. It is a privilege, and we are all in awe of what you've done for our industry.
Thank you for what you're doing. I mean,